Hello, I'm Alex Dyer, County Ordinary for the Episcopal Church here in Colorado, and I'm here with a wonderful colleague of mine from now residing in Washington, D.C., Gail Fisher-Stewart, and allow her to say a little bit about herself. Good to see you, Gail.
Good to see you too, Alex. As you said, I'm Gail Fisher Stewart, and I am the interim pastor of the historic St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C. And I come to ordain ministry by way of the Metropolitan Police Department, where I spent 20 years and retired as a captain. And so I am walking a very narrow, thin line between, as my mother says, the devil and the Lord.
Mm. Well, I think we all kind of walk that line in a certain way. So, but yeah, and that's kind of why I wanted to talk to you today, Gail, because you do offer a unique perspective, especially given everything that's going on, too. And I used to, be right down in St. Luke's, we used to be the same diocese. I always appreciated your insight on things. This is not a new thing that we're dealing with. Some people are just joining the conversation.
That's right.
And thanks be to God that they're joining. And, this has kind of been going on a while. And in some ways, the church is relatively new to this conversation as well. So, given your perspective of things, I'd love to hear from you on some kind of wisdom you can impart upon us, which is an open-ended statement there, to say, what would your message be to the church, particularly at this time, given everything that's going on? What should we be thinking about? What should we be talking about? How should we be spending our energy and our resources?
We've got to decide how we're going to be in this whole conversation of doing something about systemic racism. Understanding that when we say systemic racism, that also includes the church as being part of the problem. And so before we can tell folks outside the church what they need to do to stop being racist, we need to look for problems within the church, how the church is still racist in so many ways. I often say, we can see the evidence of racism in the church because we have historically black churches that are still here. So why are they historically black, and why are they still predominantly almost all black? Black folks will attend predominantly white churches, but we don't find a whole lot of white folks who will come to a predominantly black church. And so we have to find out why that is. The second thing is that we have to figure out where we are in this whole issue of police brutality, which seems to be one of the primary focuses of the folks out in the street. And if we're looking for a reason, if we're looking for an entree into this conversation, all we have to do is go to the Gospel of John, the 18th chapter, beginning with the 19th verse, because Jesus has been arrested, right? And he is at his arraignment before the high priest. And the high priest is asking him, as judges do, well, what did you do? And Jesus says, I've been preaching, I've been teaching, I've been in the synagogue where all the Jews are. If you want to know what I've said, ask the people who've been there. They can tell. And so in the New Revised Standard Version, but it doesn't really matter which version, it says that one of the temple police standing near slapped Jesus in the face and asked, "Is that how you answer the high priest?" So apparently Jesus did not know his place. Jesus was being a little uppity. And so the person who's responsible for maintaining law and order of the oppressor decided to put Jesus in his place. And so we have the first recorded instance of police brutality, and it's on the body of Christ. And so if the body of Christ, the church, needs an entree into why we should be involved in this issue of police brutality, the one we say we follow was, for us, the first person recorded to have been a victim of police brutality. So that's the entree.
I didn't know I was going to get a sermon today. I like that. That'll preach.
Sometimes I say that'll preach.
Yes, thank you for that. That is great. So we're called into this work, right? If we're called into this work, almost from the foundations of those who follow Jesus. Uh, what should we be doing at this time? And I mean, how should we be spending our time, our energy, our resources? There are some people who say, well, that's politics, and the church shouldn't be in politics. Uh,
Ah.
so how do we respond? Especially, you may or may not know this in Colorado, we are generally a lot of generally white people, and
Mm-hmm.
generally very privileged.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of being the context, speaking specifically to them, or to us here in Colorado. And I know you're all the way in DC, but I think you might have some wisdom even to give people here in Colorado
That'll work. That'll work
to talk
because
about. I think there's some universal things.
there are, because yeah, and I've heard that argument that the church shouldn't be political. But Jesus was very political. Now, he wasn't a politician the way we have defined being a politician. But if you look at a definition of politics that I have found that gives me strength, politics is about the decision making process that decides on the distribution of resources. And
Mm-hmm.
so if we say that everything belongs to God, then we should be involved in that process to make sure that God's people get what God has created. So
Makes sense
that's
to me.
why, and that's why we should be political. We don't have to be politicians, but we need to be political. And so as we're looking at this issue of let's look at our church, which going back into history, 1619, that whole era of the beginning of enslavement, the Church of England, and we are the eldest daughter of the Church of England. And so enslavement was begun by the Church of England in the colony of Virginia. And so then we were birthed after we, overthrew George. But the same people who were involved in that process before July 3rd, 1776, were still involved in that process July 5th,
Mm-hmm.
1776, and then when the Episcopal Church formally came into being. And so we are deeply implicated in that whole racialized system that has its tentacles in American society still today. And so, since we're part of it, we birthed it. In fact, James Blair, who was the highest ranking Anglican, said that the Church of England should be the example to other churches and other colonies of how to enslave black folk.
Mm.
Mm.
And I think that the challenging part, and I may get in trouble for saying this, but I think the challenging part is that the Episcopal Church has also like to be in the room where it happened. And our bishop even said last convention, we were not only in the room where it happened, we own the room where it happened,
Oh, we own it.
type of thing too. So we've always had this play in wanting to be involved in politics in some way, in the sense of the
Hmm.
higher thing. But a lot of that, unfortunately, if we take a hard look at ourselves, has been perpetuating systems of injustice.
Yes.
We've done some great work, I will say, in dismantling some of that as well
Right.
from the inside out. I don't want to paint too grim a picture, but also we've been implicit in it as well too.
Hmm.
And I think part of that structure, I'd love to hear from you how policing kind of relates all the way back to kind of the capturing slaves, and a part of that. I mean, I mean, it's not really. It's just evolved, basically.
Well, American policing, there's a difference between law enforcement and policing because law enforcement, you had the U.S. Marshals, you had sheriffs, but
Mm-hmm.
American policing came into play before the end of slavery. If you look at when they were New York, Boston, Baltimore, Philadelphia, within 1840s, 1850s, before the end of slavery. And so they came into being to return escaped slaves
Mm-hmm.
and also to feed into that system of renting out people to continue to pick the crops. And
Mm-hmm.
so American policing was really formed to control black and brown bodies. And so those tentacles are still with us. And so after the end of slavery, of course, you still needed, as I said, people to pick the crops. And so black life was criminalized. You couldn't stand more than three on a corner. And if you didn't have a job, well, I just got out of enslavement, where am I going to find a job? And so the very same people who had just been released, the police then arrested, and then the plantation owners would come and lease them from the police chief or the sheriff and take them back to the plantation. And it said, that system of peonage was worse than slavery. And then in the North, you had the new immigrants coming. Before you had immigrants from Western Europe. Now you have immigrants from Eastern Europe who look a little different. Plus, you have the industrialists who are making people work in dangerous conditions, not paying them enough. And so the police in the North were formed to control the black bodies who were coming from the South to the North, the different kind of immigrants coming from Eastern Europe, and the wage earner who were complaining about, you're not treating me fairly. And so to put it kind of bluntly, the American policing system was the dividing line between the wealthy elite and the wage and immigrant classes. They were to protect the property and lives of the wealthy white elites. And so we kind of still see that today, because when there are protests, we have fairly peaceful protests here in DC. And on what side do you see the police? They're not protecting the folks who are saying we want the same rights as everyone else. They are standing between them and property, protecting property. There's a classic picture of someone who lives in the White House as he was strolling over, and he strolls over down, there's two flanks of police, and he's coming down the center. They're protecting him. But then on the other side, you see the police with their shields holding off the folks who are saying, wait a minute, we're not being treated right. And so policing is implicated in the racist system that we have in America. And until we are able to let certain words roll off our lips, that this country is racist, that racism is baked into the DNA of this country, and the police are the enforcement arm of a racist society, we will never be able to make the changes stick that we keep seeing people saying, well, we need to reform the police. All of that is the top of the iceberg.
Yeah.
We need to get below the waterline to all that other ice.
So when I hear you, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but something tells me that when people say it's just a few bad apples, you would not buy into that.
No, the barrel is rotten. The barrel is rotten because majority of police officers want to make their communities better. And they have to be strong enough to withstand the pull of a culture that says when you see this type of person, you have to assume that they're automatically doing something wrong. And so you're going to have racists on policing because we draw from society. The majority of officers want to do a good job, but they're not constantly aware of how the police culture was born and bred before slavery ended can affect them today. Because, after the riots of the 60s, Kerner Commission report says, okay, well, if you just hire more black police officers, they will reflect the communities and everything will be okay. Well, that hasn't happened. And so then we brought on Hispanic officers, as they were called. That hadn't happened. Then, we have a problem with the Asian community, so we were hiring Asian officers. We're having a problem with LGBT community, so we hire LGBT. And we're still dealing with the same problems because it's not just bringing on more people or doing these surface reforms. It's admitting that the police are a part of the systematic racism of this country. And until we are comfortable saying that without saying, oh my God, I'm a bad person, we won't be able to do the changes that actually stick, because everything that has been mentioned, we've done it before. I was figuring it out today, and I felt so old. I've been involved in law enforcement actively and teaching for 48 years.
Mm.
So everything they're mentioning, I've seen it before.
You must have started young then.
I'd like to think so.
So,
So all of this, yeah.
there's this wider thing, and I think we go on. We could probably talk about this for hours, and just begin to scrape the surface. But again, I'm going to kind of focus back. Given this larger system, the barrel is rotten, everything's going on. In some ways, can seem overwhelming, right? Where the heck do we even begin? So, if you could say, like, to want to a priest or even a congregation to say, what's one thing we can do now? Give me a manageable step that we can do now to begin to do something.
Well, the first thing is to admit that this society is racist. Mm-hmm. It's just a statement of fact. Mm-hmm. And then once you admit that, then you can start taking incremental steps. And also, the other thing is to help the police department understand that they're not bad. They're just caught up in the same system. Mm-hmm. Wednesday, I conducted a webinar for 100 people about policing and how we can help the police officer see the system as it is, helping them to say the very same words, and that they are just as much victim of this racialized system as those who lie dead in the street.
Mm. Mm. So I think, what I hear you kind of saying is, somewhere in scripture something about bringing those that are in darkness into light.
Into light, yes.
Shining the light on things.
Shining a light, yes.
And if I could go even far to say, to do some of the work you need to do to get there, but it's an ongoing type of thing, even if we don't have it figured out, maybe I could say to at least ask the questions, to bring things into light. We all don't have to be experts in this, but to just ask the questions, do things, point out things that you see as inconsistent with following Jesus, about that too. So
right,
that should keep us busy for a while.
That'll keep you busy. And the training program I put together after George Floyd. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times police chiefs would be asked, well, what are you going to do? Mm-hmm. I switched it around and said, I have something for you. Now, I'm going to give you this, and you can do with it as you wish.
Now, is that your book, or is that something?
No, it's not my book. It's a curriculum primarily for police officers, but civilians need to go through it. And so the 100 people who were in the session on Wednesday will get a copy, and so I will send you a copy.
I'll look forward to it.
I will send you a copy, and perhaps.
But you also have a book coming out too. See, I'm trying to work in a plug for you.
See, it is called Preaching Black Lives Matter. It'll be out June 7th, and it's a anthology of sermons, how to advocate and how to teach as if the church really wants Black lives to matter inside of it.
June 7th? Did you mean July 7th? Maybe
July 7th. I'm sorry. Dates of just. I don't know what day it is. July 7th.
We'll blame COVID-19 on that.
There you go. There you go.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's been wonderful. Like I said, we probably could talk for hours.
Oh, we could.
And just begin to scratch the surface. There's some great work going on with our race task force here.
Yes.
And other ways in our Department of Formation and stuff like that too. So we will continue the conversation. I want to raise up that work as well. We are hopefully as a diocese leading into this work more intentionally.
Yes.
So, and again, thanks for all the work that you're doing in our wider church as well, and over there in DC.
And we miss you. We miss you.
Well, they got me here in Colorado. They got me. All right. Be well.
Okay. Blessings.